Who are you going to vote for, and will it make any difference in the housing market? The Irish general election is about to happen, but what does it really mean for housing? Will it get sorted? Does any party have any good ideas? Let's find out. It has been a little while since my last video. For those who don't know me, my name is Sinn Fleming. I have a degree in property economics. I've worked in real estate for the last 20 years, and I'm also a chartered member of the SCSi. And I recently attended an event held by the SCSi called a pre-election talk on housing, where each party had a representative there to talk about their housing plan. In this video, I'm going to provide a short summary of each party's housing plan, some impartial information, perhaps some not so impartial viewpoints, and some of the things I actually picked up from attending the SCSi talk, and also why I think a 90s video game might be a good start for how you design housing policy. So whether you are renting, buying, concerned about Ireland's future, or just have an interest in the Irish property market, this video will help give you additional information about what each party's policy is for the next few years. First up, Fine Gael, they have an emphasis on home ownership and investing in private and public housing developments. They've committed to build 300,000 homes over the next 5 years. That was increased from 250,000 homes there a few weeks ago. They have a large focus on expanding existing schemes like the Help to Buy and First Home. And they also are policy driven in terms of long-term affordable rents. So that's their blur or spin or their main headline policy plans. What I picked up from the SCSi talk was it's kind of more of the same. They want to continue to invest in public housing and supporting private sector, particularly in terms of the build to rent. So there's very little there for small landlords. Overall, supporting the private market in terms of state supports like the Help to Buy scheme. But the idea was they have a number of plans in place and they want to continue on with those plans, but just potentially invest even more money into it. Fianna Fail want to focus on mixed income communities and private ownership. They're also targeting 300,000 homes to be built. That has increased from 250,000 there recently. They are leaning heavily on utilising state lands to develop most of the public housing projects. They aim to kind of streamline the planning process. They also want to extend the rent subsidies that have come out recently. And there's focus on affordable homes directly funded by the government to help reduce the reliance on the private sector in terms of development. So Fianna Fail are broadly in line with current policy. What I picked up from the SCSi event was they're supporting housing authorities with more funding. They want to improve the planning process. They also want to support councils with vacant property grants and so on. So again, very little for small landlords. The funding is going into public housing, which will lead to more competition and higher prices for the private market. So on to Sinn Fein. Sinn Fein are also targeting 300,000 homes, but they want those homes to be affordable homes. There's a focus on public funding for these projects. They aim to halt tax breaks for real estate investment trusts, REITs. They also want to prevent what they call vulture funds from dominating the housing market. And there is a heavy focus on providing social and affordable homes. And they also want to introduce a rental freeze and an eviction ban. So that's just a summary of Sinn Féin's housing policy. But what I was a bit surprised at the SCS event was when the cameras weren't on and the reporters weren't there, there was no real grandstanding. There was no one line kind of populist statements. And there was a lot more kind of evidence that they understood the market and that the private sector was key to developing and delivering housing, and there was more understanding that the long-term solution for housing was actually going to take a long time, and even that a state-run construction company was perhaps not the right answer. There was concerns raised by Sinn Fein that the current policies that are in place just weren't delivering the desired results, and the take-up of many of the schemes that had been introduced by the government, such as the vacant property grant, were just not working because they were too complex for people to understand. So moving on to the Social Democrats, who have a focus on public land usage for about 100,000 sociable and affordable homes to be built over the next few years. and they are advocating for greater state involvement in housing. Their policies include preventing land hoarding, increasing vacant property taxes, new zoning policies for social and affordable homes, and their policies emphasise community central housing, including additional funds for homeless provisions, as well as more increased powers for CPO. Generally speaking, I thought the representative from the Social Democrats presented some good ideas. It was well spoken at the SCSi event, and a lot of their focus was on building on state land and more state involvement, but they did suggest things like new zoning policies around greater classification of social homes, which is a good idea. They also focused on building up amenities first, i.e. like parks, transport links, schools, and focus on developing them before allowing the houses to be built, which I think is a great idea. They did mention increasing the powers of CPO for the state, which I'm always a little bit worried about because there is that loss of private ownership rights. Next up is the Labour Party. Their policy is called Housing First, which is focused on building sustainable mixed income communities. They're putting a priority on reducing the waiting list for social housing, also wants to have stricter controls on rental caps, more tenant rights, and the main thing is they want to create a state-controlled construction company to build all the houses. So that was the main thing I picked up from the Labour Party at the SCSi event, was the move to set up a state-controlled body that would be responsible for delivering public housing, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. Finally, the Green Party, their policy is linked to environmental sustainability when it comes to housing. Their aim is to create eco-friendly housing development. They also want to promote green mortgages and grants, and they're seeking kind of to ensure new developments are climate conscious, as well as an increased dependency on public transport and reducing the car dependency. The main thing I picked up from the Green Party at the SCSi event was their goal to build about 100,000 or more affordable rental units, which kind of surprised me. They also spoke about the environmental and sustainable issues that are facing Ireland and the world, and they raised an issue in regards to the housing market, that this high demand cycle that we're in will probably correct itself and demand will drop off. Again, this surprised me in terms of this approach. I having the idea that we're at high level of the demand cycle now, and soon the demand will drop off and therefore we may not need to build all these homes. So that kind of approach surprised me a little bit. When I listened to all the parties outline their policies or their vision for housing, two things kind of really struck me. One was when you put all the best parts of their policies together, you might get somewhere in terms of fixing some of the underlying issues in terms of the housing market. And the second thing was, it was very refreshing to hear all the parties or the representatives from each party speak about their policies without being shouted at or interrupted at. And that was really refreshing to hear each person deliver their policy plans. There was another thing that I just couldn't get out of my head while I sat there for 2 or 3 hours listening to each person deliver their policy plans. And it was the idea of a 90s video game, SimCity. Those who know it will understand what I'm talking about, but basically the game was simple. You were the mayor of an area and you could control taxes and you could control the spending of those taxes. Your goal was to promote development, and the first thing you could do was zone land. You could build roads, you could provide water and power and other services. You could build water treatment plants, you could build power stations. As the mayor, you could build colleges, schools, libraries, parks, sports grounds, police stations, fire stations. And you did this, and if you did it all right, you could zone the land and people will build office blocks, people will come in and work. Then you could build industrial parks, development would happen, shopping malls, and then housing would happen as well. But you couldn't control any of those markets. You just had to provide the infrastructure for those markets to flourish. If population got too big, you zoned more land. If there was crime, you put in more colleges and more police stations. So the goal was simple. And I think a lot of Politicians or governments around the world have moved away from that and perhaps are moving too close to actually delivering housing themselves. And that's causing major issues within the market because they're competing with the actual public who are trying to buy those houses. So getting back to each party's housing policy, Fianna Fail, Fine Gael, very much more of the same. More money for housing bodies and grants, some changes to the planning process, but what will likely happen is it will lead to an increase of housing prices and limited supply within the private market as the government continues to compete with the private market. In terms of Sinn Fein, more government spending for social and affordable homes, which will lead to more competition again and less supply for private buyers. Large investors are likely going to be worried about some of the policies and some of the changes, so they're going to be slow to invest, slow to build, and slow to provide more units into the market. A Sinn Féin-led government could lead to less supply as a lot of the investment will need to figure out what's actually happening or get more clarity on Sinn Féin's policies and treatment towards larger builders and investors. The Labour Party's goal to set up a housing construction body didn't seem to get much support in the room at all at the SCSi event, given the absolute shambles most other led government bodies are in at the moment. I'd suggest that this would probably make the problem of housing even worse. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of faith in a housing body set up by the government to solve this problem. In terms of the Social Democrats, there was some sense to their policies with a focus on kind of rezoning towards social and affordable homes only, as well as a focus on amenities first. However, I am concerned about the ability of the private market to provide homes into the private market with all the additional costs and taxes that would be proposed in terms of the vacant property tax and vacant land tax, etc. So while there is some good points to the Social Democrats' policies, I think their policies may not match some of their desires in terms of developing homes, as well as it doesn't quite match some of their candidates, which have a very left-leaning view. The most concerning long-term plan for housing was the Green Party's policies. While there are some good things around sustainability and grants, there seems to be a thought that demand is going to disappear in a few years and we won't need all the housing that's been proposed by other government parties. And there's a focus on affordable rental units to be developed. So they want to control the rents and control the places we live, as well as restricting cars. It sounds a little bit like the foundations of a weird dystopia. So being honest, I'm a little bit worried about how much they want to actually control our lives in terms of all the policies and regulations they want to impose on housing and everything else. You are the only one who decides who you actually vote for. Voting is about picking a policy or picking parties that align with your vision for a future of Ireland. And housing is an extremely important area, so it's important we get housing right for the future of Ireland. To summarise, Fianna Fail, Fine Gael, it's very much more of the same. The goal is to promote home ownership, but they're doing a very bad job of it because they're competing with the private market. Sinn Féin has a large focus on state housing, which will make it even harder for the private market and lead to less investment from large investment companies, so that will impact the rental market. The Social Democrats have some good ideas in regards to rezoning, but their plans of taxing a lot of the private market will probably lead to less development in the long term. And I'm also kind of worried in regards to their idea of more CPO powers. The Labour Party's idea of a state construction company will likely cause more harm than good. The Greens believe that demand will drop off and we can all go live in affordable rental units. I'm perhaps being a little bit critical of them all there, but none of the ideas or none of the policies are really going to solve the problems we're facing. But as always, I want to thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comments below.